Hey, welcome. Hi, my name is Prakriti. I work at Zendesk as an engineering manager. Today, I'm going to share some of my personal experiences in tech with imposter syndrome, and then we'll work through a workshop together that I've prepared that might equip you with some strategies to combat imposter syndrome. Now, this is the introduction that I had prepared for you today. This is what I have written in my speaker notes. But as I was saying these prepared words, a parallel narrative was running through my head, and it went something like this. Hi, I'm Prakriti. That part is the same. Sometimes I have low self esteem. I don't know why I'm doing this. No one is interested in listening to my dumb stories. I'm not an expert on imposter syndrome, so who am I to suggest strategies to everyone in this room? I'm wasting your time, and you're all going to think my talk is lame. Does that sound familiar to anyone? This is a narrative that runs in my head a lot of the time when I'm presenting at conferences. Funnily enough, yesterday, I told someone that I've just finished my final run through. I've practiced this talk, it's all coming in on time. And they replied with, are you experiencing a bout of ironic pre presentation imposter syndrome? I guess I was. So, this is what we're going to talk about today. Imposter syndrome describes someone who feels like a fraud. Oh, I just noticed that the slides are not moving as I move them on my end on the screen share. There we go. I think there's a bit of a lag, so you might experience some delay in the slides. So imposter syndrome describes somebody who feels like a fraud. Even though they are successful at what they do, they believe that their success is undeserved. They fear being exposed as an imposter, as someone who has convinced everyone or deceived everyone into believing that they are intelligent, competent, or capable. They diminish their achievements by attributing them to luck or just being at the right place at the right time. Carol Lieberman, she's a psychiatrist and author. She says that most people experience some self doubt when facing new challenges. But someone who has imposter syndrome has this all encompassing fear of being found out to not have what it takes. People with imposter syndrome often bend over backwards looking for perfection. But then when they do succeed at a project, they start to believe that all the anxiety and the effort that they put in has paid off, and that's why they've succeeded. Unfortunately, this creates a cycle of further imposter syndrome. Now, I don't know whether I have imposter syndrome or not. I mean, I know that I was pretty good at programming when I was at uni, but then I joined a company and I spent my first 2 or 3 years working in tech being pretty bad at it. Now, I'm not being an imposter when I'm saying this to you. I was actually not doing well. And I know that because my performance reviews also reflected that. But now that I am 11 years into working in tech, I've worked at a few organizations where I've been surrounded by capable, intelligent, highly skilled, and motivated people. I have often felt, and I still feel, like maybe I don't belong in this group. Like I'll never be as skilled or as motivated as they are. I'm not the best programmer on my teams right now, and I will never be that person. I have had a few good opportunities in my career for sure, but I do think that a lot of them have happened because I've been at the right place at just the right time. Sometimes I question what I have done to deserve those opportunities. This sounds very similar to what I've read and heard about imposter syndrome. I'm sure it sounds similar to what you've read and heard in various talks as well. I have always felt very self-conscious of this, of not being the best programmer or the most technical person. It's kind of worse now because I don't write code anymore. That's just a side effect of my current role. I'm an engineering manager. I look after two teams, and I just don't have time to be an active code contributor. This makes me worry all the time that people on my teams will think that their manager is not technical enough, or they'll look down on me because I'm not an active code contributor. I worry about losing respect. I think being a woman makes that worse in some ways because we know that women in tech are often defaulted to be seen as non-technical. But recently, I think 2 weeks ago, I received some official feedback from work, and I would like to share a couple of quotes from that feedback. So, one engineer said, Prakriti consistently has a solid grasp on the technical status of the project. She offers good ideas and criticism in technical design discussions. Another engineer, a different person, said, Prakriti is a very technical engineer, so we get to benefit from her skills when it comes to technical decision making. This makes it sound like my worries are a little bit unfounded here. Unfortunately, there is no test that I know of that can diagnose imposter syndrome. So, how do you know when you have imposter syndrome or when you're just kind of sucking at what you're doing at the moment? Because that happens too, right? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Going back to Zendesk, though, I interviewed here 6 years ago, and I don't think I did well. In fact, I came home and I told my partner at the time, look, there's no way that Zendesk is going to offer me a job. I still don't know why I was hired. I think I was just having a lucky day. But soon after I joined, Zendesk gave me the opportunity to participate at a Girl Geek dinner event in San Francisco. They flew me over to our SF office. That's a photo of me on stage. I'm sitting in the middle there, and I'm surrounded with these other 5 other smart, capable, successful, and more experienced women, wondering, what am I doing here, sharing this stage with them? Don't get me wrong, I had a great time. The event was super fun. I got the chance to meet these other badass Zendesk women, hear their stories. I talked about my experiences. I just didn't know what I had done to deserve sharing that platform with them. I have so many more stories like this through my career that I could share, but I feel like you know what I'm talking about and where I'm going with this based on the feedback that I'm getting in the chat. These feelings result in a fair amount of uncertainty. And over time, these sorts of thoughts and feelings have built up within me a fear of failure. Now, 70% of people worldwide, not just in tech, by the way, have felt like an imposter. That's what the stats tell us. These are stock photos. In case one of you is attending, I'm sorry, you're not an imposter. I just liked your photo. Studies have shown that 46% of women in tech survey respondents agreed that overcoming imposter syndrome would make them happier and more successful. Other research has demonstrated that imposter syndrome is common among African American, Asian American, Latino American college students. They also show that imposter feelings are significantly negatively correlated with psychological well being and positively correlated with depression and anxiety. One study found that imposter feelings, and this one shocked me, they said that imposter feelings were stronger predictors of mental health than the stress caused by minority status. This was a surprise to me because we know what minority status means in tech, and I just struggled to digest that imposter feelings cause more mental health problems than even minority status does. Now, this is all just a little bit of a downer, isn't it? But in today's workshop, we are going to talk less and do more. So, this is the cool part of the workshop where we discuss some strategies that you can take home and hopefully apply to banish your imposter syndrome thoughts. We are in a bit of a restricted environment here, so I would like to encourage you to use your imagination a little bit for the workshop. I hope that you'll be able to relate these steps to a real world situation the next time one comes up. For me, let's face it, that's going to be like 5 minutes after this talk. So if you're anything like me, you will get a chance to practice these steps very soon. So this is what you do when imposter syndrome strikes. You react. REACT. This is a 5-step acronym that I'm going to take you through one step at a time. I'll pause for a minute at every step so we can practice the step together. So, all you need for this workshop is somewhere to write down a few sentences, like if you have a notepad handy, or you can just use your phone or your laptop, just a little scratch space where you can practice along with me. So, let's kick it off with step one. The R stands for record successful outcomes and feedback. Does anyone here do that thing? Please use the chat box to let me know if in performance reviews, you're just like half listening to your manager talking about your accomplishments, but the other half of your brain is in panic mode, just trying to remember all the ways in which you fucked up over the last 6 months. Oop, I hope I'm allowed to swear in this one. Can someone officially please tell me if I can swear? So you just want your manager to get through the good stuff quickly because the other part of your brain is dreading the bad stuff that you think is inevitably going to follow. Please tell me if you can relate. I hope that I'm not the only person who does this. Now, I can't see any of you on your cameras, but I'm hoping some of you are nodding, even though your camera is switched off. Well, I'm here to tell you, stop doing this in your performance reviews. All feedback is important. All feedback deserves to be treated well, given time, even positive feedback. So, this first step is about recording successful outcomes and positive feedback when you receive it. I can see the yeses streaming into the chat. Thank you for letting me know that this is not just me. So, I find that I receive many forms of feedback, qualitative, quantitative, even outside of one-on-ones and performance reviews. But sometimes I didn't realize it was feedback because it wasn't delivered in a specific way. Feedback has become a bit of a loaded term, capital F feedback. But really, any comment on your output or your behavior at work could potentially be a great source of feedback. So instead of listening and forgetting immediately, which is what I used to do, you could try recording things as they happen. Don't just record positive feedback which people are giving to you because we don't always work in these wonderful environments that are very wholesome where we receive tons of positive reinforcement. We just can't always be that lucky. So observe for yourself successful outcomes. They could be a piece of code that you wrote really well, could be a positive customer experience. It could be a great sales deal. It could be a successful marketing launch. These are just some examples. Whatever your successful outcomes look like, note them down. They were only possible because you worked hard for them. So how do you do this? I'm not suggesting something super extreme like walking out with a notebook, stopping everyone mid-conversation. I'm sorry, I have to transcribe. That's not what I mean. I will often maintain notes just on my phone because I have it in my pocket most of the time. After a quick conversation, when I get a second, I might take my phone out, open up a running note that I have, and enter into it a short summary. If I'm in a one-on-one or in a longer conversation, I will usually state upfront, look, I'm not great at remembering, and I'll ask the other person, is it okay if I take notes as we go through this chat? No one has ever declined this request, and no one's ever, been shocked or taken aback by it. So I'm sure it's fine. I'll share some examples of things that I recorded recently as successful outcomes for myself. The first one, presenting at my first fully virtual conference. This one. It's actually 8 in the morning in Melbourne right now, and I'm not a morning person. But I fooled you all, didn't I? The second one was delivering a long-running and complex project that I was the leader for, working with multiple teams across time zones, so it was quite tricky. And the third one that I wrote down was adapting to being a remote manager, which is something a lot of us are doing for the first time ever in this pandemic. So remember how I said we will have to use our imaginations to practice a little bit because it is a constrained environment. So, to practice this step today, I would like you to recall events from your recent past. In real life, though, when you're doing this, I recommend do it as events unfold because I feel like our version of what happened can change as quickly as even a day later. So for now, try to recall a recent successful outcome that you achieved, or try to recall a recent piece of positive feedback that you have received. Write it down on your scratchpad. And if you're willing and interested to share, please put your example in the chat box so we can all get inspired by each other's ideas. So let's take 1 minute to do this. I'm going to set a timer on my phone, and I'll bring you back at the end of 1 minute to continue the workshop. So starting now. Okay, that was a minute. Please share your examples that you wrote down in the chat box if you feel comfortable doing so. I would love to get some more inspiration. Let's move to step 2 in the meantime. So, step 2, which is the E of react, is to evaluate imposter thoughts and question implicit assumptions. So, when a thought arises that leads you to feeling like an imposter, write it down. Write down the immediate negative chain of thoughts that you had that followed, that led you to eventually feeling like an imposter. You'll notice a common theme here. I like to write things down. I feel like it clarifies thoughts in my head. For example, a recent imposter thought that I had was I'm letting my team down and I'm letting my stakeholders down. So for this step, I would start by writing it down. I'm letting my team down. And then I would think, what led me down this path? What was the incident that happened? What immediate negative thoughts did my brain react with that made me conclude that I was letting my team down? In my case, I was in a one on one with my manager. He shared some constructive feedback with me that was totally valid. So I decided I was going to work on it. But after the meeting, I was feeling a bit emotionally vulnerable. Like it's hard to receive constructive criticism, even if it is accurate. And someone refused to listen to what I was trying to explain to them after this meeting. They behaved quite immaturely. I was trying to sort of campaign for a project. That made me think that I wasn't doing a good job of representing that project. So I followed that path down and I concluded I'm letting my team down. Once you have this chain of negative thoughts captured, write down how these thoughts made you feel. So, to continue my example, in my case, I had feelings of reduced worth. I felt frustrated. I felt like no one was listening to me, like no one understood me. Basically, I felt unheard. Whew, that was the tough part. I find that step always the hardest. So now you've successfully evaluated your negative thoughts. It is time to question implicit assumptions hiding in those thoughts. So for each thought you had leading down the chain to the imposter thought, ask yourself, what assumptions are you making here? What evidence are these assumptions based on? Are you observing behavior and reaching logical conclusions? Or are you engaging in hyperbole and making things worse in your head? In my example, I would question, what indication has my team given to me that I'm letting them down? This person I was talking to, were they really being immature? Or was I not doing a good job of explaining? Perhaps because I was feeling emotionally vulnerable from my one on one. Highlight in your notes the assumptions that you have made. Use a highlighter, go back over your notes, and mark the assumptions you've made along that journey to your imposter thought. Another example of an imposter thought that I'm having right this second. I'm saying all this, but in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, no one is buying this. They think I'm dumb. They know that I struggle to do these steps myself. But look at the number of assumptions that I made in like 3 seconds when I had these thoughts. I'm sure at least some of you are listening, maybe even more than one person. Let's try this step together. Now, in real life, I would do this as soon as possible after the imposter thought came up. For the purpose of this workshop, try to recall a recent imposter thought that you had. If you're anything like me, you've had a few in the last 24 hours, so this should not be very difficult. So write that thought down. Write down the chain of thoughts, like I explained, that led to the imposter thought, and then go over and highlight any assumptions that you have made in that journey. Again, if you are comfortable, please do share your imposter thought in the chat box so that we can all read it and be like, yes, it's not just me, someone else also feels this way. Let's take 1 minute to do this, starting now. Okay, that was just a little bit over a minute because I had another imposter thought that I wanted to share with everyone in chat. Let's go on to step 3 now. So this is the A in React, and this step is to ask trusted people for their opinions. Now, this is an optional step. It might be more suitable to some situations than others. I often feel like I'm trapped and tangled up in my negative thoughts. Do other people feel that way sometimes? I think it's useful sometimes to expand what we believe to be true about ourselves by seeking opinions from people who we trust. You can look outside yourself. Ask your trusted family, friends, or trusted colleagues for their opinions on the negative thoughts that you have identified in the previous step. Sometimes we just need someone we trust to tell us the things we already know so we can believe them. Once you have collected this information, add it to your notes along with all the other data that you collected in step 1. To continue my previous example, I confided in a trusted colleague at work that I felt like I was letting my team and everyone down and I was not doing a good job here. He said to me, this is a direct quote, he said, "You're able to have off days and days when you'd rather not be here. But remember that every other day you do a really stellar job." You have not gotten to where you are now because you're lazy and a schmo. You got here because you deserve it and you worked really hard. So, to practice this step, try to recall a recent time when someone you trusted shared a positive opinion or fact about you. And similarly, try to recall when someone trusted shared a negative opinion and fact about you. Write down those opinions along with the data that you've been noting down so far. Let's take a minute to practice this. I'll start the timer now. Step four, we're all the way to the C in our React. Step four is to challenge assumptions with data from your notes. So this step is where we look at all of our notes, all the data that we have collected, the negative thoughts that we have written down, and we try to separate the imposter syndrome thoughts from the legitimate feedback and concerns. I try to be careful of swinging too hard towards either extreme. I don't want to think that all my negative thoughts are accurate because that would be horrifying. But I also don't want to dismiss all my negative thoughts as imposter syndrome. There might be excellent pieces of actionable feedback hiding in those thoughts that can make me better at my job and a better person. But the whole challenge with imposter syndrome is that it's hard to tell which is which. And that's exactly what this workshop has been building towards. So, in this step, you reflect on the notes you've written down. So, on one side, put all the data that you collected in step one, the data you collected in optional step three by talking to trusted people. And on the other side, as you can see on the screen, put down your imposter thoughts. Let me use this side of my hands because I painted my nails yesterday. So, what does the data suggest when you put it right next to the imposter thoughts that you've written? Does the data support or contradict your imposter thought? If you can find some data on one side that supports the imposter thought, then maybe this is not an imposter thought. It is probably a valid concern or a piece of actionable feedback for you to work on. However, if you can't find any data on the left that supports the thought on the right, or if you find data that's opposite to the thought on the right, then this thought is not accurate. In that case, this thought is probably your imposter syndrome talking. So I'll give an oversimplified example. So if I collect all the data that I have, which would be things like recent performance reviews, feedback from my team, the opinion of that trusted colleague, which I shared before, I put all that down on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, I put down the imposter thought, which I shared. I'm letting my team down. I would have to categorize this as an imposter thought. Sure, I have plenty of areas that I need to work on that will make me a better manager, but the data and the feedback just does not add up to such a severe evaluation of I'm letting my team down. Let's try this step together now. So in real life, you'll have lots more data to work with because the longer you do this, the more data you collect. For now, Look at the data that you have collected today. Feel free to bring in other data points that you have in your mind and compare it to the negative thoughts that you wrote down in step 2. Put them next to each other. Categorize each negative thought. Is there data that supports it? If there is no data to support it, then I would like for you to highlight it in your notes as an imposter thought. And if you like, please share your highlighted imposter thoughts in the chat box. Let's take 1 minute, starting now. This brings us to our final step. The T of React is to transform the imposter thought and save it. Transform, get it? So this last step, this is where we transform our imposter thoughts. Now, in the previous step, you highlighted some thoughts that were imposter thoughts because they had no data to back them up. For each of those, think about what a revised version of that thought could look like. A version that would accurately reflect the data that you have collected. It could be a small modification of the thought to make it more accurate. In some cases, you might even find that your revision is just completely opposite to your original negative imposter thought. So in case of my example, my imposter thought was, I'm letting my team down. How would I revise this to be more accurate? I would love to hear from you. Please put in the chat box suggestions for how you think I should revise my imposter thought of I'm letting my team down. What could a new revised version look like? I hear someone has said not. That is a excellent revision. I am definitely not letting my team down. Are there any other ideas? I can tell you the one that I did when I did this exercise. This is a real life example, by the way, from my own exercise. I just simplified it a little bit for the presentation. So my revised version was, my team is delivering well, but I have some good actionable feedback on how I can help them be more productive. Isn't this such a departure from the original thought of I'm letting my team down? It's just miles apart. Please remember that your revised thought should match, it should align better with the data that you have collected. Or perhaps, it can indicate that you don't have enough data yet to accurately revise your thought. Just trash it in that case. When you have more data, you can come back to it. So let's practice the final step. Go through the imposter thoughts that you identified in your previous step, the ones that you highlighted, and try to write down a revised version for each one of those thoughts. Please do share your imposter thought and the revised version in the chat box, because I'm very keen to see how other people revise their thoughts. And I hope I can learn some new ideas from how you're revising your thoughts as well. So let's take 1 minute to try this, starting now. always a bit surprised when the timer goes off, like I'm the one who said it. So in real life, you only need to do this exercise once per type of thought. When that thought or a similar one reoccurs, you can automatically jump straight to the revised thought and just skip all the steps in between. As you do this exercise a few times, you can hopefully identify common imposter thoughts that you're experiencing repeatedly, and you'll just have a revised thought ready for each one of them. So skip right to it. You don't have to go through the whole exercise again. Now, this might seem like a lot to take in at the moment because we went through the 5 steps slowly. I did a lot of rambling, but when you're doing this as an exercise for yourself, hopefully it won't take more than 5 minutes. The more frequently you do it, the more of your common repeating imposter thoughts get revised into thoughts that reflect reality better. So, what that means is the more you do it, the less you have to do it going forward. That is the kind of self reducing homework that I like to do. So, let's recap the 5 steps. So, what happens when imposter syndrome strikes? You react, record successful outcomes and feedback. Step 1. 2, evaluate negative imposter thoughts and question assumptions. 3, ask trusted people for their opinion. 4, challenge assumptions using data. And finally, transform your imposter thought. So that brings us to the end of the workshop. I have intentionally left a lot of time for Q&A and to go through some of the examples that have been shared in the chat box here. So I'm just going to read out a couple of the examples from here, and then I would love for you to unmute and ask some questions live. So the last example that's here in the chat box, imposter thought, how did I miss that? Revised thought, thank you for catching that. That is an excellent revision. In addition to the info you shared, here's what I discovered that can also help us get a full picture of how we should move forward as a team. Excellent. Crystal says, I'm honestly not sure how to revise it. It's a thought I have daily. And just a reminder, the original thought was, I am unproductive and dragging my company down. So it seems like you have some data here that says you've completed things on time and well, and the clients are happy. I would suggest that this imposter thought needs no revision. You have no data that backs it up. Trash it. Trash the entire imposter thought. You are clearly not unproductive based on the feedback that you've shared here. Okay, I think let's take some questions. If you are unable to ask your question live, or if you would just like to connect with me afterwards and chat about this workshop, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is on the screen right there. For now, I would love it if anyone has a question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question live? In the meantime, I'll just scroll through this and see if any questions were popped into the chat that I missed before. There's a lot of agreement with my imposter thoughts, which makes me feel better. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I'll wait for another few seconds, and if there are no questions, then I am happy to stop here and give you back 10 minutes of your time. Could you please share your slides for reference? Unfortunately, these slides I will not be able to share in their current format, but I am planning to convert this workshop into a blog post where you will be able to read all the steps and get, the same information in a written format. So if you think that's something that will be useful, please let me know on Twitter or LinkedIn, because I've been on the fence about doing that. Classic imposter syndrome, I just feel like no one will use it, and it's just everyone already knows this, and who am I going to help? So if you think that will be helpful, then please reach out to me and give me some much needed motivation to write that down. Any tips for how to efficiently replace the imposter syndrome thought? Example, train a habitual acceptance or validation of the revision. Yes. So I think in my experience, if you do these steps over and over again a few times, you'll start to see that your revised version from step 5 aligns much better with the data that you have collected in previous steps. Now, I have a bit of a scientific, analytical, mathematical sort of mindset. And if I can see, all the data just laid out in front of me, and I can see that my revised thought is way more accurate, and I repeat it a few times, and the same result comes up every time, then my scientific brain goes, this is obviously correct, and it makes sense to me. So I think practice and repetition here is the key to solidifying that message. Based on your experience, what are social factors affecting feeling like an imposter? Um, if I understand the question correctly, I would say some factors for me are definitely being a member of an underrepresented minority. I don't see a lot of people, who look like me at work or in tech generally. And I think that's always a little bit of an undercurrent in a lot of the things I feel, not just with imposter syndrome. But I also think it can present differently, not just based on how you look, but how you present, how you behave, how you interact. I think it all comes down to not feeling like you belong. And that feeling can come from so many social factors, depending on your demographics, your environment, your upbringing. But I feel like that's what really drives imposter thoughts the most for me. If I felt like I was just one of the group and I was like everybody else, then maybe I wouldn't feel like an imposter. I think that was all the questions. Yes, the presentation is being recorded, and I think you can find it on the Tech Inclusion YouTube channel, but don't take my word for it for that. Okay, well, if I have been unable to answer your question, or if I didn't quite understand your question correctly, then please reach out to me and I'm happy to give it another try. I would also love to hear from you if you do end up practicing this exercise, how that goes. Please send me your feedback, and I plan to do this talk, more and often. I would love for everyone to learn how to beat imposter syndrome. So if you send me your feedback, I will use it to make this workshop even better for every next time that I deliver it. Thank you very much.